Hello and welcome to Breaking Bread with Rivaj Maharaj, where nothing is off the table. For this episode, I wanted to talk about Zelensky and Ukraine, what now, with specific reference to his speech that he made at Davos. So without further ado, let's get in.
Instead of becoming a truly global power, Europe remains a beautiful but fragmented kaleidoscope of small and middle powers. Instead of taking the lead in defending freedom worldwide, especially when America's focus shifts elsewhere, Europe looks lost trying to convince the US president to change. But he will not change. President Trump loves who he is, and he says he loves Europe, but he will not listen to this kind of Europe. One of the biggest problems in today's Europe, though it's not often talked about, is the mindset. Some European leaders are from Europe, but not always for Europe. And Europe still feels more like a geography, history, a tradition, not a real political force, not a great power. Some Europeans are really strong, it's true. But many say we must stand strong, and they always want someone else to tell them how long they need to stand strong, preferably until the next election.
Wow. This is the first time Volodymyr Zelenskyy has grown a pair of balls regarding Europe. We saw a similar frustration and desperation when he took on President Donald Trump and Vice President J.D. Vance at the White House in the United States last year.
What kind of diplomacy, J.D., you are speaking about? What do you mean?
I'm talking about the kind of diplomacy that's going to end the destruction of your country.
Yes, but if you
Mr. President, with respect, I think it's disrespectful for you to come into the Oval Office and try to litigate this in front of the American media. Right now, you guys are going around and forcing conscripts to the front lines because you have manpower problems. You should be thanking the president for trying to bring an end to this conflict.
Have you ever been to Ukraine that you say what problems we have?
I have been to.
Come once.
I've actually watched and seen the stories, and I know what happens is you bring them on a propaganda tour, Mr. President. Do you disagree that you've had problems bringing people into your military? And do you think that it's respectful to come to the Oval Office of the United States of America and attack the administration that is trying to prevent the destruction of your country?
A lot of questions. Let's start from the beginning.
Sure.
First of all, during the war, everybody has problems, even you, but you have nice ocean and don't feel now, but you will feel it in the future. God bless.
You don't know that.
God bless.
You don't
God
know
bless.
that.
You will not have a war.
Don't tell us what we're going to feel. We're trying to solve a problem. Don't tell us what we're going to feel.
I'm not telling you.
Because
I'm
you're in no
answering on
position
this
to
question.
dictate that.
That's
Remember
exactly what
this.
you're doing.
not
You're
dictating.
in no position to dictate what we're going to feel.
You
We're
will-
going to feel very
you will
good.
feel influence.
We're going to feel very
I'm
good and
telling
very
you,
strong.
You will feel influence.
You're right now not in a very good position. You've allowed
From the
yourself
very-
to be in a
from
very
the very
bad position,
beginning
and he
of the
happens
war.
to be right about
From the
it.
very beginning of the war.
You're not
Mr.
in a good
Brown,
position.
I
You don't
was
have
in
the cards right now. With us, you start having
not
cards.
playing cards.
Right now, you
I'm
don't.
very
You're playing
serious,
cards.
Mr. President.
You're
I'm
playing
very
cards.
serious.
You're
I'm
gambling
the
with the
president
lives
in
of
war.
millions of people.
You think-
You're gambling with World War
What do you-
III.
what do you
You're
think about?
gambling with
What do you
World
think
War
about?
III. And what you're doing is very disrespectful to the country, this country.
I'm
That's
with
back
all
to you.
respect to your
Far
country.
more than a lot of people said
very
they
respect.
should have.
Have you said thank you once? This
A lot
entire
of
meeting?
times.
No, in this
Even
entire meeting,
today.
have you said thank
Even
you?
today.
You went to Pennsylvania and campaigned for the opposition in October. Offer some words of appreciation for the United States
are
of
you
America
speaking
and the president who's trying to save your country.
Judging from this clip, an incident where Zelensky was worried, panicked, because President Trump was pushing him into a corner to make peace with Russia, we saw his pushback and we saw this outburst which led to the nasty consequences that followed. Now, this outburst in Davos is his second major such outburst. However, the one thing that is different is that this is his first outburst against his EU benefactors, those people that have carried him and edged him on to continue this fight against the Russians in Ukraine. The very people on whose gratuity his regime relied upon so heavily is now turned on them. This is what happens when you have a myth that is created around you and a myth that is created about you. Playing into this myth for so long actually makes you believe in this myth. And at some point, someone has to then bring you back down to earth. Don't forget, Zelensky is a former actor, and this has been his most cherished role so far. In fact, this role literally and figuratively paid him dividends when you look at all the money that he and his cronies embezzled. So yes, he acted well. I would wager he acted extremely well. He actually acted so well that he bought into the myth of this role that he was playing, this part that he was playing, that it actually became a reality for him. Have a listen to what he says. I'll read off a few of his statements. He says, Europe looks lost, trying to convince the US president to change. Here he's saying Europe is indecisive. They have no balls. They need someone with a firm hand to tell them what they need to do and when they need to do it. He then goes on, but he will not change. And here he's referring to President Trump. It's almost like he's saying to the Europeans, you don't realize President Trump is not going to change. Yet you still hope that change will come. This is obviously ludicrous. I mean, just the thought of Europe abandoning the United States and teaming up with Team Zelensky, what does he literally have to offer? Again, Ukraine means absolutely nothing to Europe. Absolutely nothing. If Ukraine meant anything to Europe when the Ukrainians were pushing to be included in NATO, it would have been a no-brainer and they would have been allowed on. They were just used as cannon fodder in this game that was being played. And this guy, he just fell for it. He fell for it so much, he's actually believed the myth that now, as he knows the curtains are coming down, he almost wants the play to continue in perpetuity. By the way, I think that Donald Trump has urged, and I say urged with the kindest of respect, because we know Donald Trump, it's his way or the highway. So basically, I think Donald Trump has told him that he needs to sit down with the Russians and the Americans in the UAE. And I know that he is absolutely mortified at the idea. Donald Trump's recent moves over Greenland has shown Zelensky that Europe will not take a stand against Donald Trump. And it is for that reason I also believe that his European benefactors, that is Zelensky's European benefactors, have also indicated to him that the show is now coming to an end, the gravy train ends, and he needs to sit down with the Russians. We've had similar calls coming out from Giorgia Meloni of Italy, Merz of Germany also talking about sitting down with the Russians at some point being an inevitability. So the Europeans have definitely told their puppet that, listen, mate, the writing's on the wall, you need to sit down and get this deal done. Looking at it from Zelensky's point of view, he's probably terrified. He's trembling in his shoes at the moment because he realizes that he's outlived his usefulness. Now, once he's outlived his usefulness, then, his threat or the threat to his well-being could come from any number of places. You've got the CIA, you've got MI6, you've got the Russians, and even closer to home, all the neo-Nazi benefactors that he had, all those neo-Nazis that he was trying to appease. are now going to be looking for his blood should he sit down in the UAE and cede territory to the Russians. We know the Russians are definitely not going to give up the 4 oblasts that they've taken. They're not going to see the sacrifice of the lives of the Russian soldiers that were made in gaining that territory. So some land will be given to the Russians. How Zelensky comes out of this alive, I don't know. I have no idea, because I know that his factions back home, they'll eat him alive. He then goes on to say, and I'll read this: President Trump loves who he is and says he loves Europe, but will not listen to this kind of Europe. Now, full marks to Zelensky. He's hit the nail on the head. I don't know if this realization has dawned on him recently or if he's known it all along. Indeed, President Trump does love himself. He's a narcissist. That's what narcissists do. There's no one more important than them in this world. So, Zelensky, full marks. Full marks to you, mate. You've hit the nail on the head. And then he says that President Trump loves Europe, but not this kind of Europe. Once again, Zelensky, you nailed it, mate. Your comprehension skills are much better than most of your European backers. And I'll tell you why. President Trump himself said at Davos, he loves Europe, but he doesn't like the policies that Europe has enacted, and it has to walk back most of the policies it has enacted in the last 10 years. He also talks about how his friends see Europe as something unrecognizable. Now, we know that Trump, from hitting the ground in his second term in office, he and his administration have had nothing but contempt for the left-leaning governments and liberal governments that are in Europe currently. You've got clips where J.D. Vance came in earlier on in their administration telling the Europeans to get their house in order.
In Washington, there is a new sheriff in town, and under Donald Trump's leadership, we may disagree with your views, but we will fight to defend your right to offer it in the public square, agree or disagree. Trump administration is very concerned with European security and believes that we can come to a reasonable settlement between Russia and Ukraine. And we also believe that it's important in the coming years for Europe to step up in a big way to provide for its own defense. The threat that I worry the most about vis-a-vis Europe is not Russia, it's not China, it's not any other external actor. And what I worry about is the threat from within, the retreat of Europe from some of its most fundamental values, values shared with the United States of America. So I come here today not just with an observation, but with an offer. And just as the Biden administration seemed desperate to silence people for speaking their minds, so the Trump administration will do precisely the opposite, and I hope that we can work together on that. In Washington, there is a new sheriff in town, and under Donald Trump's leadership, we may disagree with your views, but we will fight to defend your right to offer it in the public square, agree or disagree.
You've had Trump make similar statements. So, yeah, Zelensky is right. Donald Trump will work with Europe as long as it's in his interest. But having seen what happened with the Greenland debacle, he will drop them like a hot potato at the first opportunity should they steer out of line. And he knows he's holding all the cards. Zelensky then, I have to give him credit for this. He then goes on to say the unthinkable. I'll read what he says. Some European leaders are from Europe, but not for Europe. And once again, mate, you are 100% correct. However, this realization has come far too late. Far, far too late. If you realize this at the beginning, there probably wouldn't have even been a Ukrainian war. And all those innocent Ukrainian and Russians and all those soldiers on both ends and all the suffering you've put your people through and the Russians have been through could have been avoided. His statement about some European leaders are from Europe but not for Europe. It's almost like he's realized this, and he's also come to the realization that this is the last time he'd probably have the opportunity of speaking at Davos, as well as speaking to those that have been commandeering him all through this war. And he's not about to hold back. He's just letting go. It's almost like an employee in a huge corporation, that has worked and felt this employee's felt he's done his best for the company and built up a resentment along the way because he hasn't been recognized or things are not going his way. And then he hands in his resignation. But when he's invited in for that exit interview, that one interview where you're not going to be coming back, the floodgates open and anything and everything that can and should be said and you want to say, you just let it go. And this is almost akin to that scenario. When he made this statement, it would have been awesome if the cameras could have panned to the facial expressions of those like Keir Starmer, Boris Johnson, Ursula von der Leyen, all those EU people that were, EU leaders that were backing him and, cheering him on into battle, and we will not let you down, and, Lindsey Graham's and all of them. Would be beautiful to have seen what the expression on their faces was like. Talk about biting the hand that feeds you. Bear in mind, this is coming hot on the heels of a package the Europeans agreed to only last month. I think some $90 billion worth of aid for the Ukrainians. While watching Zelensky's speech, I could visualize Vladimir Putin and, Lukashenko sitting down, having a cognac together, enjoying a cigar, and just having a good laugh, looking at this and saying, 2026 is our year. We could not have wished for anything more. Christmas came early this year. Incidentally, Volodymyr Zelensky's words, but more so his body language, is incredibly similar to that of the Danish Prime Minister when she gave her little briefing in front of the reporters. I had made mention about it in a previous video, and I'll link that video up here somewhere. Exactly the similar type of body language, broken, defeated, being thrown under the bus, being read the riot act by people that are more powerful or in more powerful positions and countries than you, and just moving you around playing you like a fiddle. It's almost like he's been promised a date to the prom by a liar. That is the despair and the sadness that I see on his face. I suspect he's also been told by his benefactors in the EU that the writing is now on the wall. He needs to sit down with the Russians in the UAE, and this needs to be wrapped up. And I'm telling you, he is in fear of his life, because his Azov buddies back in Ukraine, if they have one inkling that anything he is giving away is going to be contrary to what they want, that's the end of Volodymyr Zelensky. He's going to meet his maker. Zelensky, my friend, I hope that you find somewhere nice and warm to spend and enjoy those millions that you've managed to embezzle from the war effort for Ukraine. However, if your enemies have anything to do about it, and you should remember that your list of enemies has grown exponentially larger as of you having delivered this speech in Davos today. So I suspect if they have anything to do with it, if I were you, I would swim to the UAE rather than fly. And if you still choose to fly, make sure your plane doesn't land or go anywhere near Turkey. Because from what has been happening recently to leaders of different countries and different leaders of different institutions, mate, I think you could be flying too close to God. Thank you for listening to this episode, and we look forward to seeing you in the next episode. Please remember to like, share and subscribe, as it helps us with the algorithm and it helps our channel grow.